Okay, good morning, everybody. We are going to start from where we left yesterday, before the general comments about the milestone number 2, obviously. And so just to recap what we did yesterday evening, we started from this sample project that basically has an HTML page, a JavaScript page, a JavaScript file, a CSS file that we didn't consider, and a quite stupid, basically useless PHP file right now. And this, and we left here. We left with this chat-like interface in which you type something, and it reproduces the same thing that you typed with speech synthesis, and you can also press the button here and say something, and after a while, yeah, and after a while it will repeat like a parrot. And we are using PHP for doing that, but basically we could also do the same thing just in JavaScript, because we are just taking that variable, passing through an Ajax function to PHP and back. So we can just, right now we can use JavaScript for everything. We don't need right now a PHP file. We just need a server, an HTTP server that provide this HTML plus JavaScript page to produce this. So what we did yesterday was basically realize the, very quickly, speech synthesis part that consists of 3 lines to create an utterance for speech synthesis with the current text that we are writing or saying, and speak that text in English with the default voice. And we also create the speech recognition part here that uses WebKit speech recognition, because this is basically not supported by any browser right now except Chrome, but it could be, because it's an experimental draft specification. And so we create this speech recognition. We set a couple of properties, like we don't want that the recognition is continuous, we don't want interim results, and we want everything in English, and we can start the recognition. And we set up 3 event handler. What happens when we start the recognition, what happens when the recognition ends, anyway ends, no matter if someone spoke or just ends after a timeout. So if I, for instance, press this and don't say anything, recording. After a while, it stops automatically. Even if I mute my microphone and it doesn't get the recording sentence like before. And the most important thing is the onResult event handler, in which we get the actual transcription from speech to text, and we can manipulate that, and we can get these to the PHP file and proceed with manipulation. And for this, we iterate on these results array-like structure from the index 0, or the lowest one, that is that result index in line 69, to the length of that array, and we just put together the best alternative, this 0, of the transcript of the recognized speech. What happens yesterday after the lecture, and this is the version you find on GitHub, is that I add some comments so that you can also have these some additional information, nothing particularly strange. And I change the icon, so if you don't see, but if you press this, the icon change, and when the recognition stop, get back here. So recording, you see that there is a bar on it. You see that there is a bar on it, and then it stops, and well, so basically this change, but it's just a couple of functions. So and here, instead of having the on clicking that button, the start recognition, there is this function that switch recognition. So if you are speaking, if the recognition is started, you can stop it if you press the button, and if it's stopped, you can start it. Basically, it's just an if over there. So we left here more or less yesterday, and we noticed yesterday this problem here, that if I press this, and I'm quite close to the
recording,
there is this
recording, there is teaser.
There is this recording that appear, and it shouldn't, because it's not something that you say, but it's something that the synthesizer say. So we can solve this in various ways, obviously, by having that not seeing recording, for instance, or just by having that not recognizing recording, and just keep this recording stage. But we added this recording stage just to have a feedback that the process is started and that the recognition is actually working. And so maybe we can not get rid of that. We can just say, if you recognize the recording, just keep it and don't synthesize that, because this is a hard-coded message, is a message that we create deliberately. So here in the function that create the synthesis of the speech, we can, yeah, it's almost time of lunch, so speak a spec. We have this variable message recording, that is the variable that we don't want to recognize. So we can basically say, if val is different from that variable, then we can have the synthesis of the speech. So just to skip that variable. So in theory, if we refresh this and we try again, so no recording.
No recording.
The computer doesn't speak recording, so we don't have recording, and we just have whatever we are pronouncing, whatever the user is pronouncing. So right now we just added speech recognition and speech synthesis in this, again, quite simple way. Just whatever the user say, just make an echo of the same sentence, and maybe it's not really useful. So what we are going to add, starting from today, is some manipulation of that text. And again, right now we have a PHP file that provides this echo, but we can work directly in the front end, just to copy and paste that variable, to pass this variable from the synthesis from the recognizer to the synthesis. We can perform some keyword matching. So if the sentence contains hi or hello or whatever, then the response should be this. And if the message contains the weather or a name of a city or whatever, the response should be that. So this is very, very again, stupid as a procedure, but could, in some cases, in some of your project, this could be something that is good enough, because maybe you don't have, you have a prototype, and you don't have to have a full natural language processing part. So we are going to implement this very, very simple. If the text contains that, then the response is this one, and if the answer is the text contains the weather, for instance, the response is it will rain, or something like that. That again, very, very simple. Basically, no natural language processing is just checking if in a string there is a word, but it's something that could be useful, could be enough for some of your project. And then from that, we will move on a, let's say, real natural language processing part. So again, these simple things could be done in JavaScript directly or in PHP. Basically no difference, because it's just a couple of if clause. But we are going to do this in PHP, so we are using that file that is there for no reason right now. So we don't modify anymore this converse, and we are going to open this process.php. So right now, the process.php get the message, the text coming from the front end, and just return back to JavaScript this very same message by putting it in another variable, but it's just something that we are going to use for simplicity, not for a real reason. So what we are going to do here, so let's try to remember your PHP training, your PHP skills, and we need to do a string compare. We would like to say, I just write here, it's in English, if hi is in user query, obviously not in this way, then echo hello, for instance. So the echo hello is fine as a line, the other one obviously not. How we can do a string compare, or to see if something is contained in another string in PHP? There is no string compare, and there is no contains, because it's PHP. Yeah.
Suppose it is at the beginning of this.
No, we don't suppose. Never suppose with text. Yeah, in the case of the hi, it should be one word and at the beginning, obviously, because it's the first thing that you are going to say. But in case of other words like what's the weather, we cannot suppose the exact position in a sentence, because I could say what's the weather, or the weather, or in Turin, or weather in Turin. So we don't want to make strong supposition. For the I should be obviously in the beginning. There are at least, I think, 10 different ways of do this in PHP, because again, it's PHP.
And this regular expression,
We can use the regular expression, yeah. And
and divide it to, you can exclude it to an array, insertion for a word.
yeah, that could be the way. The other way could be get the position of the string inside the variable, that from the position get the actual content. And so if a position is in a position in the string, we can obviously recognize that there is, or we can use regular expression. And in PHP there is a function that is called preg match, that is matching of regular expression, that has two parameters. The first one is the pattern as a regular expression to match in the variable, in the string, let's say, and the second one is where is the string where you want to look for these, and the string is, in our case, user query. And this is obviously not Boolean, but returns 1 if it finds a match and 0 otherwise, so we can say equal to 1. Because we want to check if there is a pattern in a variable, and if there is a pattern, we will have 1. So for instance, we can say that we are interested in checking if there is hi in the variable, or hello. So this will check whether hi or hello are present in the user query. And if they are, that preg match function will return 1, and so we will have back to the JavaScript function hello, and we will have the full process, the computer, the speech, hello, and so on and so forth. And so since we are going to have chat about the weather, we can add, for instance, another matching about weather as a word. So like before, preg match of weather in user query, and again it's equal to 1, and then we can echo it will rain, and then we don't need this user query. Maybe let's change, because we get too much rain. So again, very simple, because it's just string matching. You are looking if some words in AND or in any combination that you can realize with I forgot the name, with regular expression. Any combination of that word, of sentences or single letter that you can put together is in your user query. And maybe, again, for some of your project, this is good enough. Because again, it's a prototype. The goal is about prototyping. You don't maybe need to have a full conversation with a lot of alternatives, and also maybe with also extremely realistic data. Obviously, this will always reply hello when you say hi or hello. It will not reply anything or just a wrong sentence if you say anything else different from this. And if you ask the weather in Turin, the weather in Milan, the weather in New York, the weather today, tomorrow, it will always be sunny. That it's a way of life, but it's not really precise right now. So let's try this. So if I type here,
Hello.
hi, it will reply hello, and if you say what's the weather in Turin,
It will be sunny.
it will be sunny. But it's just if I say weather, no, because we know
I'm
that
sorry, I don't have the answer to that yet.
if I say weather in a proper way, it will reply it will be sunny. If I say weather like the food, if I say I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that, because he has no answer from the PHP file. So this is the default sentence that we put yesterday in our code in JavaScript. So if I say weather, maybe it's written in the proper way.
It will be sunny.
Again, it will be sunny. So it's quite stupid, but it can handle, if you create much more if statements than this, it can handle some cases that may be, sorry for repeating that for the third time, it may be enough for some of your project. Obviously, for doing all this, we don't really need a PHP file. We don't really need all this stuff. We just have just a JavaScript file to do this. Is string compare, and look, it's a contain into string in a string, and so it's not really hard and complex. But it's a starting point. So what we are going now is to put some more intelligence here, so that is not just much of patterns, but it's something much more complex. So if you say hi, if you say hello, if you say greetings, and maybe about the weather, if you say what's the weather in Turin, we'll have a different response. And we know that Turin is a city, and if you say what's the weather in Politecnico, we say no, Politecnico is not a city, so it is not, you cannot have the response about the weather in Politecnico, and this is what we are going to do today. Today, without the PHP part, we will add the PHP part for working on this next week on Tuesday, and then we'll complete by trying to attach a real weather forecasting service, because the part that we are going to do is about natural language processing. It recognizes that we are speaking about the weather, it recognizes that we are speaking about a city, but it doesn't give you any information about the actual content of your conversation. If you want the weather, you have to ask the weather service about the weather. If you want a recipe, you have to ask to a service that provides recipe, or you can provide the weather and the service and on the recipe, the missing information, the actual content of the conversation for creating the response. And this is the last part that we are going to do Tuesday probably, but more with more probability on the Wednesday, next Wednesday. So 3 steps. The first step is to understand how to create a conversation, how to set up a natural language processing, and which conversation we are going to recognize, which elements are important, and which tools we are using, and then we can move that in code. But right now, for today, no more code, no more coding, and let me get back to the slides. So, what we are going to speak about are conversational,
Is it possible to have the last version of this file on the website?
these.
The programming.
Yeah, I will push that after the lecture. So it's on GitHub in the same VU example repository, yeah, for sure. We are going to speak about conversational platform. So platform for handle conversation and create chatbots also. We are not really interested in that, but so they are natural language understanding or natural language processing platform. We are not going to train a natural language processing algorithm on our computer from scratch, because one is not the topic of the course, and two, you have to know what we are doing, and so is quite complex, and it's quite it requires some knowledge, let me say it that way. So there are these natural language understanding platform that are focusing on developers, and they require no knowledge of natural language processing, basically. Just a couple of definitions to know what you are going to do. And they are, again, for developers, typically they are cloud-based because it's easier for the producer of this platform. And they were born to design and integrate voice user interface or chatbots into a great variety of applications, mobile application, web application, also standalone devices. And we can have 2 families of these, more or less. The first family is those platforms that acts like extension of a product. So you need to have something, a product, and so you can create an extension. Alexa and Google Assistant are 2 examples of this. You can create extension for Alexa or Google Assistant, but to have your extension working, you must have Alexa running and Google Assistant running on the device. So you have to embed the entire Alexa or the entire Google Assistant, the entire product in your application so that you can use that extension. And you have all this service that is available for, let's say, Alexa or Google Assistant, even if you don't need them. Obviously, there are advantages and disadvantages because you build on a much larger platform like Google Assistant or Alexa, and these extensions are called actions on Google for Google Assistant, and the skills for Amazon Echo. So something that you add to the existing product. And this is something we are not going to see. or better, we are going to see one of these standalone services that can also create extension from those platforms with some changes, can also serve as a base for an extension of this, but we are not going through that. We are going to create something probably minimal, but self-contained and really, really focused on what suits your need, what is the objective, not just to have an assistant that is able to speak about everything, from the weather to the TV channels, from the recipe, news, and so on. We just want to speak about the weather here, and in your project, you probably just need to speak about 1-2 things, very, very limited, not about everything. The second family is obviously standalone service that are a series of facilities to create different kind of conversational interface in one cloud, in one platform, typically cloud and typically integrated in suite of different services that may include also speech-to-text function or text-to-speech function in addition to natural language processing. And also extension for Telegram or Actions Google and a lot of other services. And these are quite, not a lot, but we have a different example right now of good products of this standalone service, like Dialogflow, that is a Google platform, Watson from IBM, Wit.ai from Facebook, and Lewis from Microsoft, and so on. Also Lex from Amazon, that is not Alexa, is another product that obviously match with Alexa, but it's different because it's a standalone service to just create what you need. And so for instance, Wit is, well, it's a website, it's a California-based startup, founded in 2013 and then acquired by Facebook in 2015. It's free to use and it's quite minimal in parallel to other platform, as multiple language support. You can also mix this language in the same conversation. And as for SDK, one in Node.js, one in Python, one in Ruby, and one in Go. And it doesn't have PHP, so we are not going to use this. And it's also quite minimal, so we are not going to use this, also for that reason. Then there is Snip. I just present you 3 of these, and then we are going to use one of that. Snips is here for an honorable mention because it's not cloud-based, and it's European, so it has 2 different features that the other 2 doesn't have. Snips is a platform that you have to download on your computer. So all the processing of the natural language is not made in the cloud, but is made on your device. It's already done. All the algorithm, all the logic for performing natural language processing is ready to be used, but it's just not working in the cloud. It works on your computer. And it has a great focus on privacy, obviously, because it doesn't run on the cloud, so there is nobody that can get your data, get your information, because everything is local and run on Raspbian, Android, iOS, and so on. Only the setup of the natural language processing of the conversation, the sentence that you are going to recognize is online, but then you have to download that and use locally. It's free for makers, and for building prototypes, and has 6 fully supported language and 1 not yet fully supported, and mostly use Node.js. It's not quite new, it's 2013 like Wit, but was just acquired this month by Sonos. And its phrase base is not United States, in California, like, for instance, Dialogflow, that is the Google service that we are going to use. That was founded in 2010 and was acquired by Google in 2016. And previously, if you look for Dialogflow, also if you need some additional documentation, it was known as API AI. So if you say API AI, they are speaking of the same things. Then Google changed their name in Dialogflow. It's free to use for simple usage. For some operation, you need to put your credit card in the Google Cloud services, even if it's free to use, but that's it. And different services, like for instance, the one-click integration with Telegram, Facebook Messenger, Google Assistant, Cortana, and so on. So you can create your conversational assistant and then with just one click have that working in Telegram without basically no code or a very limited code. And you can reuse that for Telegram, for Messenger, and so on. As the other, as a multiple language support, English, Dutch, Italian also, Chinese, and so on. And as various official SDK, as some REST API to interact with, as a lot of not official SDK, including among the official one, PHP and Node.js, that are the two languages that we are in this moment most interested in. Notice that right now we are going to use the API version 2 of Dialogflow that are quite different from the version 1, that are not yet dismissed, but they will be soonish. So Dialogflow as a website, that is what we are going to use. You need to have a Google account, or you can create an account here to use that. And well, it's just videos, documentation, advertising, and whatever you want. But before using that, we just need a couple of definitions. To understand what we are going to do. So we are not speaking, we don't need hard knowledge about natural language processing, but we just need a couple of definitions. And these definitions are true for Dialogflow, but they can also, they apply also for the other conversational platform, because these things are called in that way. And in Dialogflow or in the other application, you create an application online that's called an agent. That is the container of all your conversation for a certain goal. And this agent will have entities and intents. The intent is basically what you are going to create and what you are going to use mostly. Is a mapping between what the user say, what's the weather in Turin, and the action that should be taken by the agent, like provide a response to that, or call an external function to get the weather, or perform an HTTP request to do something. And typically, an intent is composed by three parts: what the user say, multiple example of possible sentence, an action, and the response. Again, what the user say, what's the weather, and the response, it will be sunny. Dialogflow offers different out-of-the-box intents to be used, like small talk. Small talk are small conversations, simple conversation. How are you? Fine, thanks. And you? What's the weather today? Oh, it's really hot today, or it's really cold. Conversation, small talk. Then we have entities. We are not going to create typically new entities. We are going to use that for sure. Entities represent concepts, while intents represent a small part of a conversation, a request from the user and the response from the agent. Entities represent concept. What the city is, what the first name is, what the color is, what it's allowed to be a city. So Turin, it's a city. New York, it's a city. Politecnico is not a city. So it's not allowed, there is not a match between those. And they serve, so you can create them, you can use that if you need to create a new concept that is not already present or that it's really suitable and personalized for your application. And they serve for extracting parameter from natural language input. What's the weather in Turin? What's the weather today in Turin? We can have two entities. Today, that is a date, that can be treated as a date, and the city, that is Turin. And we got these two parameters independently from the sentence. So we can, for instance, pass them to a weather forecast service and ask for the weather from today, a specific date, and the city, without having to extract them from the text and without have to pass the entire sentence to the service. There is a lot of entities on Dialogflow. You can create them, as I told you, but they should be created only for concepts that require actionable data. Like I need a city because I need to get a forecast from a city. Typically you don't create an entity for verb. You are not really interested in what a verb is because it's not an actionable data. So these are just the two definitions, intents and entities, and we are going to create our conversational agent here right now in these 15 minutes. So you can sign in or go to console. If you press go to console here, you enter in the backend of Dialogflow, and you need to sign in with Google all the time. You need to do this. And so you can choose your Google enable account and wait some moment. And we can start with creating a new agent. So I already have some agents, but let's start from scratch. You don't have if you log in for the first time. So to creating an overview before. Here you can create a new agent. Here you have a menu. Let's say the optional, the agent name, if you have one, enabled, the language of the agent that is currently enabled. I have just two agents, one that is the test for this class and the other that was a task manager. You can create an agent and view other agents, setting the properties, and then you have the static part that are intents, which intents you have, how do you set up that, and you can create a new intent. Entities, knowledge, that is a beta function to see what is learned by the platform. You can say, okay, you miss that this is about weather, but you think that it is about greetings, and so you can try to train to say, okay, you are making some wrong assumption. Next time that you see that sentence is about weather, is not about something else. Fulfillment, that is for connecting other external service to your conversation. So for instance, you can use fulfillment to get data from a weather service in a dedicated server that you are writing. Integration, that's one-click integration, like so for instance Telegram. You can create a conversation, then add the Telegram token that is given by the bot for creating chatbot in Telegram, press start, and that's it. You have a chatbot. You created a chatbot usable for Telegram. You can look at it and use it, and it will reply whatever you are training it in the intents. And something like that. You have Skype and many other devices. Obviously, Google Assistant is bigger in the first place. Then again, you have some history, and you have this pre-built agent. So for instance, let me open food delivery. food delivery, you can import these agents that contains different intents, different entities. You can then personalize that. But for instance, they are able to handle conversation like, I want to order 3 pizzas and 6 bottles of sparkling water. So it recognizes that one is food and one is something to drink, but both are to be ordered. One is 3 and the other 6, also the ordinal number. And you can also remove something from your existing order and so on. You can also check what's ordered, so it's quite complete for handling orders, and you can import that, and you have an agent for doing all these conversations. You can obviously personalize that as well. And here you have a lot of that. You have jokes, you have language settings, hotel booking, quite a lot of, let's say, standard way to do. Typically, they have the sentence provided by the user, not the actual response, because that depends from the logic of the underlying application that you are going to create. And then there is this small talk that was saying before, just a list of intents about, so if you want to speak about hello, goodbye, greetings, you have a series of options already filled up for you, so you don't have to say okay, bye-bye, and the answer to bye-bye is just you have all the user provided sentence. You just have to insert the answer, or you can speak about user. So I'm very angry right now, so you can answer whatever you want. And these are small talk conversation that you can enable and then use by setting it here. On the other side, you have a chat-like bar in which you can test your conversation. So there you can write or speak something, and you see here, and we will see here, the actual response, whatever it is, various parameter, and so on. But first of all, let's create a new agent. So to create a new agent, it asks you for some information, like the name. That is just the name that you have to remind. So let's call it the weather agent. The language, without space. The primary language of the agent that you can choose between various language. We will keep English because it's the language that we are going to use. The default time zone, it automatically tries to get it from your computer, but you can change it. It may be useful for converting time, for instances. And if you have any existing Google projects that you want to link with this agent. And for Google project, they mean a project on their Google Cloud service that you may be created for other purposes. If you don't choose or anything, it just create a new Google project for you. So we can press create. It thinks about it a little bit. Too much? Oh, okay. And then you can go here and in the settings, so your agent, you can change avatar, you can add a description, you can change whether you're using the API up to, let's say, 1 month ago. You can choose, you could choose whether you're using API version 2 or 1. If you want some beta features, log interaction, you delete the agents, and you can add the languages. It should be able to switch about different languages in the same agent. If you want, how do you want that the natural language processing part is performed? If you want a hybrid role-based plus machine learning mode, or if you want just a machine learning modes. But again, it's all under the hood, it's all in a black box. You don't have a lot of control on that. You just have to choose. By default is hybrid. It has a good result. If you know what you are going to do, you can also change the threshold for the machine learning classification, and we are going to use the default setting. And you can also enable or disable some feature like correct spelling of words, or disabling the retraining when you have new modification of the agent. Otherwise, when you create a new intent, you change an existing intent, you get all this model retrained again for get the new sentence that you are inserted. So this is quite, it's not trivial, it's not our if something is contained, obviously. Then you can import and export that. So in the end, when we will go to export this as a zip file, put on GitHub, so that you can, if you want, import indirect from the project that we are going to create here. And other feature like speech recognition, it has some feature about speech recognition. We are not going to use that because we are using the web speech API, but as a platform, they have all these other suite of conversation. If you want to share the message, if you want to enable sentiment analysis for some kind of feature, but you have to use the enterprise edition and probably pay quite a lot. And so here we have our agent, and yeah. So if you click on entities, you see that you can create custom entities. Again, let's imagine that we want to understand 5 different kind of colors. We can create an entity that's color and say that the entities is yellow, red, blue, purple, and so on. So that are colors. So every time that you recognize blue, yellow, whatever, this is of a category that is called color. And Dialogflow has quite a lot of system entities already available that they were listed here. Sometimes ago. Not anymore. But we are going to use, there are entities for cities, first name, date, temperature. Most of the standard stuff is already here. And then we have this intent. So in the intent, it is where you are going to create your pieces of conversation. You have 2 intent already created for you. The first one is the default fallback intent, and the other one is the default welcome intent. So what do you think that these intents are about? So I can drink this. So default fallback intent. No, the other one. Default welcome intent. What do you imagine that is about? It's in the name. It's for greeting you. Yeah. If you open it, you see that, for instance, you have, if you say hello, hello, hey there, greetings, and so on. All these kind of sentence, you have a series of response. So if you say hey, it will reply, for instance, hi, how are you? One of these randomly chosen. And this is our in English, but if you create an agent in Italian, you got this in Italian as well. And the other one, the default fallback intent, it has basically nothing inside if we open it. Just some responses and it's enabled, what is the default fallback intent?
When it doesn't understand it.
Yeah, when it doesn't understand, or better, when it doesn't know what are you speaking about. So if you train that to speak about the weather and you say, please order 3 pizzas, because again, it's almost lunchtime, it'd say, I don't know what are you speaking about, because I am only able to speak about the weather and not everything else. So if there is no intent that match with your actual conversation, the default fallback intent is triggered. So right now, if you say hi, it will trigger the default welcome intent. If you say anything else, it will trigger the default fallback intent. And we can try. So here there is the chat. If you say hi, you see the default response is hi, how are you? That is the welcome intent. And the intent here, it's the default welcome intent that's triggered. If I say, what's the weather? Sorry, can you say that again? And the intent trigger is the default because it has no idea of how to handle this kind of conversation. It only knows how to handle the hi, hello, hey, how are you, all these kind of things, but not other kind of conversation. So this is quite useful in reality for, let's say, from one part, from debugging, because you maybe train your agent for speaking about the weather, and you try that and you receive this, so you have to provide a different example of your conversation to avoid this. And also because maybe users speak about other things or try to send to this platform information that you are not able to handle, and without this they will not receive any answer. So at least they have an indication that something is wrong and they should behave differently. How differently is not the default fallback intent responsible to handle that. You may be a help, for instance, intent or something like that. So in addition to these 2 default, you can also disable them if you don't want to use, but we are going to create an intent. So the intent has quite a lot of fields. Well, first of all, there is an intent name. This is just the name of your intent. In our case, it will be something like ask weather, for instance. Then we have context. Events, training phrase, action and parameter, response, and fulfillment. So let's say the most important, but the most frequently used are training phase, action and parameter, and responses. So training phase is what you want to recognize that the user say. Some sample of what you want to recognize. Typically, it works well. It starts to work well with 10 of these sentences, and it's also able to then merge and to understand if the sentence provided by the user, even if it's not an exact match of these training phrases. And these training phrases are just example. So we are going to write here, what's the weather in Turin? Just a real example of possible sentence, around 10. Then response, what this agent should respond when it receives that message, that query from the user. For today and the next time, we are going to hard-code the response here, because we are going to speak about the weather, but we are not a weather service. Here, there is no weather service, so it will act like our PHP file. It will always reply, it will be sunny, or it will rain, some predefined response. To get rid of this predefined response, we need fulfillment. So we will empty responses, we will enable fulfillment so that someone, somewhere else, will be provided the response for us. the right response. So with fulfillment, we are going to create a link between Dialogflow and an external service in code, so that when the intent is recognized and fulfillment is enabled, the exact external service that we choose will be triggered, and we get the information from that, and we can reply with, for instance, the real weather in Turin today, not just it will be sunny. And action and parameters, if you want to define some actions, because maybe you don't want to get this intent in your code, but you don't want to get the full intent name that could be long as you want, but just a shorter string as like an identification. And also how to handle parameter. What's the weather in Turin? Turin is an entity, is a city, and it's a mandatory entity, it's a mandatory parameter or not. And if it's miss, what will happen? Then you have events. So all these, as I told you last week, all these work with the user that performed the first step. So everything, all this is triggered by the user that is asking something. It's not triggered from here. You cannot have the system that asks you something. You have the user that asks something and the system that reply. You can mimic the other case in which the system seems to ask you something by using events. Events are just triggers that could be generated by code. So when something happens, this intent is triggered, and so the response is provided without passing through the training phase. So this looks like the system decided to act, but instead there is an event. So you don't have, so the difference is that in phrases you have a user that is speaking or writing something. In events you have typically a computer system that generates an event for this, and this triggered the entire entity. Context, instead, we are not going to use that, but they are quite important. So you notice here you have training phrases and their response. I'm asking something, I have a response. You don't have a real conversation. You don't put together different intent. What's the weather in Turin? It will be sunny, and that's it. And this intent finish. You cannot continue conversing. Or hi, how are you? Is not in the same intent, because you only have one question and one answer. One slot for the question and one slot for the answer. You can obviously put together intents to create conversation, and you can use context to do this. You can imagine context like global variables, in which the parameter you define here are stored there for a certain time that you decide. Could be quite long, could be quite short. So you can put together different intent. So you may have an intent that say hi, and the response is hi, and this trigger another intent that say how are you, because it's triggering is in the intent name. Or you can is in the context. Or you can say an intent say what's your name, and you say my name is your name, and you say a response nice to meet you, whatever your name is. And after 3, 4, 5 intents in conversation, you may have a response that call you for your name, because that will be stored in a context. So let's imagine my name is Luigi, nice to meet you, Luigi, and then we speak about the weather, and the answer at a certain point will be, it will be sunny in Turin, Luigi. That Luigi is in that global variable that is in the context. To chain together, to pass information among the intents. But this is quite, let's say, complex, and let's start simple. So intent name, ask weather. Let's create our intent. So right now we need training phrases, we need responses, and we eventually need actions. Training phrases. So user expression that we are expecting when we speak about the weather. Suggestion. What I'm going to write here. what's the weather today? I can change. What's the weather in Turin? It's not wrong, but after. We will use that after. So we create that, and notice what happens. The system highlights Turin, and that's why I use Turin, not today. And say, oh, according to me, the system, Turin is a city, is among the entities that pertain to a city. And in this specific case, is Turin, it's just one city. So with this example, we create basically, it's like we created a lot of different examples, like what's the weather in Milan, what's the weather in Genova, what's the weather in New York. So every what's the weather in a name of a city, in the world. And this is also a parameter. So we can say it will be raining in city in our response. So this is the entity, and this is the information we can, for instance, pass through to a weather forecast service where we are interested in the weather. And you notice here that among action and parameter, obviously you have a parameter right now that is that geocity, that is the city as an entity, and it also a value like a variable. So you can use this variable after in the response, for instance. And this will be filled with the actual content of your city provided by the user, not just the one from the example. Then, what's the weather today? So, today, as before, is highlighted as a date, because it's a kind of date. Let me delete this. So let's imagine that this is wrong. It's not, but let's imagine that this is wrong. So let me add again what's the weather in today. So let's imagine that it doesn't highlight that. If I press enter, it will highlight as before, but that we want to highlight something because the system doesn't, or because the system doesn't wrong. We can obviously create this highlighting. We can select today, and if we select today, it gives me a list of all possible entities that can be used from the system. So it says, first of all, GeoCity, because it was already used, but you see there is age, there is ordinal, there is music artist. It has a list of possible music artists in the world. That has airports, a list of airports, phone number, zip code, given name, last name, full name, address. It has a series of entities, categories, mapped with real content that can be used. So this was a date. So we can keep that. And no. So what's the weather today? Other expression? Is it going to rain? In New York? And then also it is going to rain. And it's fine. We want that our intent is able to answer like this question, more or less this question. So the user can also say, tell me the weather. I'm using different name of the city, but you can also always use Turin, it's the same, but it got them. So you can also check if you if you write a city in in Italian, that there is not the English equivalent recorded here, that maybe there is this mismatch, but you can tag it manually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At least another couple of sentence. No. One more. Another one. Will it be snowing in Turin tomorrow? So obviously it gets both entities. So these are some sample. As I told you before, we need to work well, 10 of them. We are a little bit under this threshold, but it works. It doesn't, no problem. So here in the action parameter, we have this table that say which entity we are going to use, which parameter and value we are going to use, and we can say whether these are mandatory or not, and what happens if they are a list or not. And if we choose that they are mandatory, it also asks what happens when they are missing in the sentence. So let's imagine for a moment that only the city is mandatory, because we assume that if we don't have the date, is today. Let's make this assumption. You can have all mandatory, it's not a problem, just to have an example. So you see that appear this column that say prompts. These prompts are what happens when you are asking what's the weather in general, or what's the weather today without the city, because the city is mandatory. So what will happen? If I ask you what's the weather, you reply to me, where? That's it. And you can define one or more prompts. They are then randomly chosen by the platform. So if you say what's the weather today, or it will be raining tomorrow, the answer is where, and you what are going to answer? Here, maybe not, because it's not a city. So you can train for catching here, but in Turin. So even if we don't provide this answer in Turin or just Turin or for Turin, is something that is able to catch and provide you the answer that we are going to create here. So here in responses, you can have default responses that are just textual. If you press on the plus, you generate response for Telegram, with emoticons, for whatever you want, but just we are going to use text responses. We can provide multiple text responses. They will be chosen randomly from the dialog flow. So it will be sunny. And if you want in Zeo City. So what's the weather in Turin? It will be sunny in Zeo City, in Turin. What's the weather in Rome? It will be sunny in Rome. That will be filled with your the city that the user is providing, and we can also say it will rain. And we can also provide other alternatives. Here we don't have a recommended number. We can just have one of that. The question from the user are those that they use to train the intent, to train the agent to provide, to get what you're speaking about. These are just answer, static answer, without a real match. And then we will, next time, delete this response and enable this fulfillment, that is call a web service to connect, to have a real weather forecasting. But right now, we don't. And so we have to press save because we completed this. We can also come here and edit that, add new sentences. If we press save, here in the corner say intent saved, and after a while, agent training started, where it's training all the intents for your agents, and then agent training completed. So now you can test all the intents of your training. And you can test here, for instance. So if we here, let me, there was a reset. So let's start from the beginning. I say hello, and it will answer good day. What can I do for you? Because it's the welcome intent that was still there. We never change it. And so let's make a let's use one of these, exactly one of these, like what's the weather in Turin? And you say, maybe not, you say that it got the right intent as expected, that is ask weather. There is no action because we didn't define an action. There are two parameters. One of them is filled up with Turin as expected. The other is missing, but it's not mandatory, so it doesn't force. And then if we press here, we will see the diagnostic info. We will see the JSON that is provided by this platform, in which you see that there is the query text, that is the question, what's the weather in Turin, and that the fulfillment text, that is basically the response, that is, it will be sunny in Turin. So if you have a real a fulfillment that for an external service, you will receive something like this, obviously without this fulfillment text field, but empty, also with this empty, and you have to provide to the platform the text to add there. So the process is this started, recognize an intent, recognize that intent needs additional information, external information, get from your server, from your code, additional information for the weather forecasting service. Your code should take this information and create a sentence like it will be the actual weather in the actual city, and respond back to Dialogflow so that it can provide the answer to whatever application is showing this, either the chat here on the website, either Telegram, either your web application in HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So let's try without the city. Will it rain today, tomorrow? I don't remember. The sentence was, is it going to rain? So this is a little bit different. So you know that will it rain tomorrow is not matched, because we didn't provide any example about this kind of formulation. And this was the reason why I don't want to add is going to be sunny tomorrow, to be sunny, because we can also try, if you say is going to be sunny, we should have the same answer, what they are going to say. So how we can solve this? Well, we can add that sentence here and have the agent train again, so that it's able to recognize will it something in a certain date. And if we say tell me the weather, so notice that the default answer right now is you don't have anymore the intent as ask weather, so it's correct, but you have where as the response, because tell me the weather. I didn't put the city, that is mandatory. And you see that there are three contexts right now that are those that you can set up there. These are implicitly created for maintaining the context of the conversation, so that the next answer in a city will be put together with the original request, and you get the actual response. So if I say here in Rome, the intent will be again ask whether, because it's the right one. We have no context anymore because we finished our context, we exhausted our context with the right information, but we get the right intent and right answer. It will be sunny in Rome, as we create the right question from the attended question from the step number 1. If we try to say something is not here, the weather today in Turin, you will see that even if it's not a sentence that is exactly present, is able to infer that we are still speaking about the weather, and it matches correctly both the city, that is Turin, and both the date, that is today. So, if you go, for instance, then in history, you see some history of this conversation, and where they are. In training, you can also see what happens in a session. In this chat, I say, okay, you get this as default, intent, this is wrong. This is wrong, so this is not default intent, and right, this is right. And you can also add the sentence to in the right intent to increase the training set of these sentences. And every time you perform this change, or every time that you save an intent, it obviously triggers another intent saved, agent training saved in a while, and agent training complete. It just train all the agent for you with all the intents that you created. So you can stop here for today. Tomorrow there will be a lab that will be about your web application. So let's call it a supervised work group. So you can work in group on your application, and if you have any question, I will be there to answer to your programming, let's say, question, or about M3. And next week on Tuesday, we will continue by using, instead of this chat here, using our web application to speak with the algorithm with these 2 intents that we have. And that's it. Have a good lunch.